Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight is Parshat Vayeira, and sometimes when I give over Torah, I pick one or two insights and delve into them, very deeply. Tonight I have a whole string of insights, and I'm going to keep each one relatively short so we can get all of them. All of the parshiot are the same, that there's just so much happening, so many different events and incidences and stories and insight. So tonight we're going to start with the idea of the 10 tests of Avram. According to tradition, Avram is tested 10 different times. And in this week's Parsha, the 10th and culminating test is what's called Akeidat Yitzchak, the Binding of Yitzhak, the instruction from God to bring Yitzhak up to the Temple Mount, Har Moriah, and to offer him there. So we're going to look at this from a couple of different angles. So the first one is from the Slonim Rebbe in the Tivot Shalom. And he mentions, he's not the only Hasidic Rebbe, and before I say what he said, I just want to mention, only in the 10th test does the text actually say that God tested Avram very, very clearly. And so the Slonim Rebbe discusses the nature of a test. And we're told, especially those who have one was Avram, Avram is an archetypal figure of which the sages say, Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, the actions of the patriarchs and the matriarchs are a sign for their children. They pave the way for us ethically, morally, spiritually, but even more than that, their actions actually create the reality that the stories are seemingly representing, but they're actually bringing them into reality, and then they will repeat themselves over and over again. So all of Hasidic thought teaches us it's not just Avram who has 10 tests. Everyone has tests. This is the nature, the existential nature of being in this world, is being tested. And so the Slonim Rebbe says that if a person, let's say, reaches a certain spiritual level, and then they're tested. So he says, if the person maintains that spiritual level, then what's the test? This person is already matured spiritually, and therefore has, as it were, climbed the ladder and is equipped to pass a test. So he says that it isn't exactly what happens. What happens is when a person is tested, all their previous levels are like go dormant. And a person like momentarily is without all of that spiritual attainment. And that becomes the test. But that leads to a major question. If our spiritual levels are taken away every time we have a test, so one could think, well, what's the point of working so hard spiritually to climb up the ladder if the more you climb up, the next test is going to be just beyond you, and all of your previous levels, in a way, seemingly are not going to help you face this test. So why struggle so much with spiritual attainment? So it's just a question. It's just a question based on what the Slonim Rebbe is saying. As I said, what he wants to impart to us is that the nature of a test is a person finds themselves temporarily without the vessels to understand the test, and has to, at that point, like really, really grow spiritually in order to pass the test. The sages have told us that God never gives us a test that we can't pass, that is like impossible to pass. It might be difficult, it might seem impossible, but the nature of a test is God would not give us a test if he didn't have a certain amount of faith that we could in potential pass it. So to get back to the question, so how do we pass the test? If all of our previous spiritual levels have temporarily gone dormant, so what are we left with? And so this is a teaching that Reb Shlomo used to tell us all the time, is that when it gets down to it, a person can learn the entire Gemara, can memorize all the Tehillim, can know the Chumash backwards and forwards. But he would always say, the question is, how deep does it get inside? How much is it actually integrated? Some people are very, very talented in memorization. And so to memorize texts is not difficult. The question is it really changing us? Is it getting deep inside and becoming a part of us? And so here we can understand that when a person gets a test, which we all do, that even though at the moment it seems that everything I've achieved, excuse me? Yeah, wow, almost sneezed. All the attainment up to then was not helping us, but that's not really true. Because if we integrated all of the previous levels that we've reached, that is what will give us strength to pass any test. And we're told that the word test is a nisayon. And in Parshat Vayeira, the verb is nisa. He tested Avram. And the root is nes. Well, nes means a couple of things. One, it means miracle. So what's the connection of a miracle and a test? So it's not that every time we pass a test, it's a miracle. But the nature of a miracle is that God suspends momentarily the laws of nature, or and on a personal psychological level, we have to go beyond our nature. That becomes like a nes, like the splitting of the sea. Well, this contradicted the laws of nature. So God temporarily interfered or canceled the laws of nature in order for a miracle to happen. When the miracle is over, the laws of nature come back into play. So on a personal level, passing a test means going beyond our personal nature, what we think we're capable of. And that brings us to the second meaning of nes, is in the book of Bamidbar, there were snakes, burning snakes that were attacking the people. And people were dying. So God said to Moshe, make a metal snake. He made a copper snake and put it on a nes. So a nes is like a pole. And anyone who would look at this snake would be healed. So Rashi explains it's not looking at the snake because it's on a pole. The people had to look up towards heaven, towards God, where the salvation would come from. And also this idea that the advice given if someone is thrown off a horse or falls off a bike. So the advice is get back on the bike immediately, because if not, you'll have this fear of bikes forever. In other words, don't let the temporary setback become a trauma. And so here the nes means a staff. And this became the symbol of the American Medical Association, the snake on the staff from this story. So that's the other meaning of nes, that when we pass a test, it lifts us up. It's like being like our banner is flying on the flagpole. So here we see that the 10 tests of Avram, they were all for the purpose of teaching Avram and having him elevate himself spiritually one step at a time. But each time, Avram had to go beyond what he thought he was capable of doing. He had to go beyond his natural inclinations, his natural temperament, in order to pass the test. So we should all remember this, because when we have a test, I'm sure everyone feels this. Sometimes we have a test and we feel we have no vessels. We don't know what to do. So that's what the Slonim Rebbe in the Tivot Shalom was trying to explain. That's coming from the nature of the test itself is putting us in a situation where we have to stretch ourselves and not depend on any spiritual elevations that we had achieved in the past. So may we all be blessed to be able to do that. Now, another aspect of Akeidat Yitzchak. In English, it's called the Binding of Yitzchak, because he was literally bound to the altar. And so as much of a test, we always think of it as Avram's test, his 10th test. But it goes without saying, it was also a test for Yitzchak. And according to the Midrash, it was Yitzchak who said to Avram, bind me to the altar, because I might, in this reaction, intuitive reaction, try to stop you, and I might harm you. So bind me to the altar. And so it's been called that ever since, Akeidat Yitzchak, literally the binding of Yitzchak. So this idea of binding, so for men, every morning we put on tefillin. And it's actually an action of binding ourselves to God. We wrap the tefillin around our arms, and we put the box across from our heart, and we put the other box here on the head. And we're taught that this is a process, a symbolic ritual of binding ourselves to God. And here it's really in thought, in speech, because we say a blessing, and in action. So this is very typical of so many mitzvot that we could ask, well, if the idea is binding ourselves to God, can't we just do that mentally or through speech? why do we have to actually do a very physical action of binding ourselves, wrapping ourselves as if we're binding ourselves to God? And this is the secret of almost all the mitzvot, are connected to a physical action or a physical object. And we combine thought, speech, and action, but we don't depend on just thought and speech. And so this is just a simple idea, is that we're taught that the soul has what are called soul powers. The soul powers are basically the sfirot. Chesed and Gevura and Tiferet and Netzach and Hod and Yesod and Malchut. These are powers of the soul. Keter, Chachma, Bina, Dat. But how does the soul express itself? So we're told that the soul expresses itself through three garments: the garments of thought, speech, and action. So as we said in the beginning, the story of Akeidat Yitzchak is not a one-time event that happened to two people 3,800 years ago. This is a teaching for all of us, really every single day. It's an everlasting, eternal teaching. And so each and every one of us has the opportunity to bind ourselves to God through thought. How do we do that? We do that through prayer, meditation, contemplation, many types of meditation. And it's through thought. We bind ourselves through the thought process to God, meaning we focus all of our energy on God, or to bind ourselves to God through mitzvot. And there, most mitzvot, not all mitzvot, but many mitzvot are connected to saying a blessing over the mitzvah. We say 100 blessings a day. So every time we use our speech and we say, Baruch Atah Hashem. So the word Atah is you. It's like face to face. And so we are binding ourselves to God through speech. And then, of course, as we said, that so many of the mitzvot are connected to a physical action and or a physical object. So here we see the archetypal symbolism of Akeidat Yitzchak applies to each and every one of us almost the whole day long. Because every time we say a bracha, if we had the frame of mind to engage with what's called devekut. Devekut means clinging to God, binding ourselves to God in the moment through thought, speech, and action. And this is connected to a very, very important teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, where he took the verse, B'chol derachecha de'ehu, with all of your ways, know him. And so the Baal Shem Tov taught that not just religious actions, davening, doing a mitzvah, is an opportunity to connect to God. He wanted to expand that and teach people that, in essence, everything that we do has the possibility, the potential of giving us a way to connect to God. It could be through going for a walk. It could be working in our garden. It could be through cooking. It could be through a hobby. It could be going to work and being engaged in work. Whatever it is, he taught, in all of your ways, know him. You can know him. You can cling to him, and you can be in a state of devekut, while you're doing even seeming mundane actions. This is a very, very important teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. And Rav Ginsburg takes this idea and he expands it in the following way. He says that there's another verse, it's not a verse, it's a teaching from the sages. Kol ma'asecha yiyeh l'shem shamayim. All of your actions should be for the sake of heaven. And so it's explained, what does that mean? All of your actions should be for the sake of heaven. So let's just take the example of eating. So in the idea of making all of your actions be for the sake of heaven, so we eat in order to give us strength to serve God through prayer, through mitzvot, through good deeds, all the different ways that we can serve God, especially good deeds, that we eat in order simply just to give us strength to do all these good things. The Arizal, he added another level to this. He, of course, agreed with this explanation, but he said that virtually everything that we do, even mundane things, are connected to other mitzvot. So again, we're going to take eating as an example. So if we're eating bread, so first we wash our hands, we say a blessing. We say a blessing over the bread. We say an after blessing. We do mayim achronim. We wash our fingers after we eat. We make sure that the food is kosher. The idea is that when we eat, we should always say words of Torah or be thinking of words of Torah if there's no one else there. And so the eating in of itself is not a mitzvah per se, but it's surrounded by other mitzvah. So the Arizal said that if we look at many different so-called mundane actions, there will be an aspect of a mitzvah connected to it. The Baal Shem Tov went one step further when he said, B'chal derachecha de'ehu, in all of your ways, know him. In other words, and this is the critical idea, eating is not just to give us strength to serve Hashem, and it's not just because there are other mitzvot connected to it, that we can make eating a holy act in of itself. That was the point of the Baal Shem Tov, that we can take even mundane actions and infuse them with holy intentions. And so eating becomes a mitzvah in of itself, or an opportunity to connect to God. So this is a teaching from Rav Ginsburg, that he put these different ideas together to try to emphasize the importance and the innovative idea of the Baal Shem Tov, what he was trying to impart to his students and to us and to this day. Okay, now another aspect of Akeidat Yitzchak, and that is in the verse, God comes to Avram and says, please take your son, your son, the one that you love, your unique one, Yitzchak, and take him lech lecha, just like the first test was go to yourself. And now the last test is also lech lecha, and bring him as an offering. And the language is please take And so Rashi tells us that God is not 100% commanding him. He is and he isn't. But he's saying, please do this for me. And do it for yourself also. Because this test will like cement your, I'm going to use this because it's a modern idea, your legacy, meaning that all the other tests that you passed will grow in validity because of this last test. So please do it for me and do it for you. So it's just an interesting language that we usually think that God commanded Avram to take his son. But here we see, please. So I was thinking that there's a similar story. The words are a little bit different, but the concept is the same. And that's when, after the golden calf, so God and Moshe had broken the tablets, and God said, Hanicha li, which means, it doesn't say the word please, but allow me, and I will destroy the people, and I will make a new people from you. I'll start from scratch. You'll be the new patriarch. We're going to start all over here. And of course, Moshe would not have anything to do with it. So Rashi says that Moshe understood in the words that God said, more or less, move out of the way, or give me permission, allow me to destroy the people, and I'll make a new people from you. And so Moshe understood, well, what happens if I don't give permission? What happens if I tell God, no, I don't allow you? And that is exactly what Moshe did. Moshe said, if you contemplate doing such a thing, wipe me out of the book that you have written. So Moshe does not give God permission. And then the text says that God acquiesced to Moshe's plea for the people. So I had this idea that where did Moshe, in a sense, understand that the language of God was giving him an opening? That's what Rashi says, that he saw that the language that God was using was an opening for him to plead for the people. And his pleading was successful. So we could say that Moshe learned it from Abraham. He learned it here. Why? Is because, and we don't have the time to go in the depths. I'll direct everyone to Orchard of Delights, where I have a long article called The Silence of Avram. Everyone asked the question, everyone, for thousands of years, how come we don't see Avram arguing with God? Avram argues for the evil people of Sodom, and he's not going to argue to save his own son's life. It's a huge question, huge philosophical question, a spiritual question. And so I explained very clearly, and others say the same thing, that God had promised Avram that through Yitzchak, the tradition would be carried on. And now God comes and says, offer him up as an offering. So it's not even paradoxical. It just doesn't make sense. How can it be intellectually? How can it be that God is telling me to do this? So Avram, I'm doing this to like the short version. Avram intuited that this can't be God's will. It can't be God's will that he wants a human sacrifice. It can't be. But Avram understands that it's a test. And so he needs to pass the test of faith. And so he goes through the motions. He doesn't say anything. He goes through the motions, but the whole time, he in not just the back of his mind, in his gut, he feels it just can't be. Something, somehow, God is not going to ask me to do this in the end. And of course, he was right. And we're told that the Midrash says, a very important Midrash, that Avram says to God afterwards, after the angel of God comes and says, don't lay a hand on him. Now God knows that you are a God-fearing person. So Avram says, Master of the world, until now, I didn't say anything. But now that you see that I was willing to do this, you have to remember this for all eternity. And when your people need compassion, you have to give them compassion based on this test that I just passed. And that's why we read Akeidat Yitzchak on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And in the prayers in Musaf, we remember Akeidat Yitzchak. It's a very, very central part of Rosh Hashanah, because Avram was able to elicit from God an assurance of his compassion for his people in the future. And so the point I want to make here is that Avram understood from the language, please take your son, that he understood that in between the lines, that this can't be God's will. God's will is that I pass the test, but not that I actually offer my son. And so here we could see a connection with Moshe later, that he also understood from the language of God, Hanichali, allow me to destroy the people and I'll make a new people from you. So that's just a very deep, deep connection here. The next insight is also about the Akeidah. And this is actually, we're going to tie the beginning of the Parsha to the end of the Parsha. The very beginning of the Parsha is that God comes and reveals himself to Avraham. Avram's sitting at the opening of the tent. And the Torah doesn't tell us what actually happened at this revelation. It's just God appeared to Avram, and there's no record of what was said or what God imparted to Avraham, or what Avram's experience was. So we can postulate many different things, but we're told when does this happen? When does God appear to Avram? And so we're told this is 3 days after Avram gives himself a circumcision at 99 years old. It's a major surgery. It's a major surgery at that age. And so our tradition tells us that 3 days after call it an operation or a major health episode, that the 3rd day is always the hardest. It's when the pain is at the most. We could say even the danger of infection is at the most. So we're told that God comes to visit the sick. That is the context of why God is coming to visit Avram and appears to him. So here's an idea of the 3rd day. And the sages are telling us that the third day is almost a point of weakening. At the end of this parsha is Akeidat Yitzchak. It's right at the end of the parsha, and God comes and tells him to take Avram to the land I will show. It's very, very similar to the first commandment from God, or instruction, to Lech Lecha Me'artzecha. Go to yourself from your land, from your birthplace, from your father's house, Ela Artz Asher Areka, to the land that I will show you. And here it's also Lech Lecha to the land of Moriah, to a mountain that I will show you. And then it says Avram saddles his donkey, and he takes Yitzhak, and he takes the wood, and he takes two others according to tradition, Yishmael and Eliezer, and they go. And then it says, and it was on the third day that Avram lifted up his eyes and he saw the place from afar. So here, again, not only is the first test very similar in language, Lech Lecha, into the place that I will show you, but here, the beginning of our parsha, there's the context of the third day, and here there's the third day. In this case of Akeidat Yitzchak, so Rashi says, why does the Torah have to tell us it was on the third day? Why is it important that we know that? And so he says that part of the test was Avram wants to do the will of God. So God comes to him and says, do this. And so Avram immediately gets up and he goes. But we can imagine what Avram is going through. You can imagine the mental turmoil. He's going, okay, this is what God said. But as we said before, there's a part of him that says, there's no way that God wants me to do this. But there's a bit of paradox or confusion. And so Rashi says, it says specifically the third day, because it's a merit to Avram. Because if he would have just gone and done it, so people could say later, he didn't have time to think about it. God told him to do it, and without thinking, he went to do it. And then maybe afterwards, he's like, oh my gosh, what have I done? So it says the third day, in a sense, to give merit to Avram, that he had a lot of time to think about it and ponder it. And he still went through the motions of Akeidat Yitzchak. So that's what Rashi says. So here we have an interesting thing, that on one hand, we're told that the third day represents a certain aspect of weakening. And that's why God comes and visits him, because he's in a weakened state, and even a dangerous state, and he wanted to make sure he was okay. And here we see that the third day, in a sense, represents Avram's strength. He had time to think about it, and he's going to go through it anyways. So from this, we can learn something, a concept that runs through a lot of Jewish tradition, and that's called chazaka. That when we do something 3 times, it gives it a certain strength, a certain status. The word chazak means strength, and chizuk means when you give someone strength to overcome a certain test or obstacle. Chizuk. That's why at the end of each of the 5 books of the Chumash, the whole congregation says, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazak. Be strong, and be strengthened. And we say it 3 times. This idea of chazaka. And even halachically, that if a person does a certain action 3 times, without saying beli neder. We say this before Rosh Hashanah when we do Hatarat Nedarim, when we go before a court, a Jewish court, and we ask permission to cancel vows that we might have made without understanding the significance of them or even knowing that we did it. And one of the things is, if a person does something 3 times, it's like taking a custom upon oneself. And then it's like, well, you need to continue because you did it 3 times. So we always say beli neder, and if we didn't, so if we want to nullify that action, we have to ask permission. So here we just see an interesting thing, because the idea of 3 days, we see it in our parsha twice, and in both cases, even in the case of the 3rd day was a state of being weak, but the idea is to strengthen yourself in the 3rd day, and that's why God came to visit Avram, to give him strength. So when we go through the Tanakh, interestingly enough, we see many instances of 3 days or 3rd day. And I'm just going to mention, we're not going to go into depths about any of these particular instances, but I'm just going to mention a whole string of them. There's obviously a lesson here, this idea of 3 days. And also, like Rashi said, there's a certain thought process that goes into a 3-day process. So, and these are not in any particular order, but I just wrote down a whole lot of different stories that incorporate 3 days. Like I said, I'm not going to explain them at depth. People can look into them on their own. When Yaakov is told by God it's time to return home, and Yaakov is really afraid to ask his father-in-law Lavan permission, because he feels he's not going to get it. And so he takes off. And we're told that after 3 days, Lavan comes to understand that Yaakov is left with his daughters and grandchildren, part of a whole story. And then he chases after him. But the story mentions that Yaakov was able to extract himself from Lavan for 3 days before Lavan realized and chased after him. We see the same thing when we leave Egypt. When after the last plague, the killing of the firstborn, so all of Israel leaves, and after 3 days, because originally, and this appears a number of times, Moshe says that we want to go and worship God in the desert for 3 days. He never says we're leaving forever. That's all he asked for, 3 days. And so when the certain spies were like following Israel, they come back to Pharaoh and say, well, it doesn't look like they're coming back. And that's when Pharaoh decides he's going to chase after them. So here again, it's almost like we said, Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim. What happened to Yaakov, trying to extract himself from the grasp of Lavan, repeats itself when we're trying to extract ourselves from the grasp of Pharaoh. Then we're told the 9th plague was the plague of darkness. And it says in the text that not the highlight, but the strength of the darkness was for 3 days. We're told that almost all of the plagues actually lasted for a week. But here the darkness increased, but for 3 days, it was so thick that people could barely move, and no one could even see each other. It was just the climax of the darkness was for 3 days. Then we see also when Yosef is in jail. So the baker and the butler reveal the dreams that they had, and both of them have to do with 3 days. No, excuse me. Both of them had to do with 3 items. The butler saw 3 clusters of grapes, and the baker saw 3 loaves of bread. And the baker saw a bird coming down and eating the bread. And the butler saw that he was able to squeeze the grapes and put the cup in Pharaoh's hands. And so Yosef interprets it, but he interprets it both in 3 days' time. The baker will be hung, and the butler will be returned to his position. But he interpreted it as 3 days. And in the mystical meaning of dreams, the book I wrote about dreams, I have a whole explanation from Rav Ginsburg that what Yosef was able to do, he was able to connect space and time. Because in the dreams, he was told 3 items in space, but he interpreted it as 3 days. So he made this unity between time and space. But here I'm just bringing over and over, we have these 3 days. And all of them have to do with a certain process. Here, the butler and the baker, either their punishment or their reward, it took 3 days to unfold. Yaakov leaving Lavan and Israel leaving Egypt, it took 3 days before they were discovered in the transition from going to slavery to freedom. And then they had to deal with the consequences. We also have with Esther, when Mordechai comes to Esther and says, this is what Haman is plotting, you need to do something. And at first, Esther said, what can I do? I'm not called before the king. You can't just go to the king unannounced. Put my life in danger. And Mordechai convinced her that she had to. And then she said, I will do it. Tell everyone to fast for 3 days and 3 nights. And I will do as well. And the 3rd day, I will go to see the king. So here again, we see this process, this transition was in 3 days. And the last one I'll mention, there's a few more, but Yonah was in the belly of the fish. In the Torah, it never says whale, it says the dag, which literally means fish. He was in the belly of the fish, we assume a gigantic fish, for 3 days. So in other words, his whole process, he's running away from God. And he takes his ship and he, in a sense, allows himself to be sacrificed in order to save the ship, because he understands the storm is because of him, because of his running away. And then he's in the state for 3 days. And many interpretations, what does it mean he was in the belly of a fish for 3 days? Are we to take this literally? Is this figuratively? But I could just point out that the word dag is very close to the word in Hebrew for worry. Da'aga is the same root. Da'aga means worry. And so it could be interpreted that Yonah was in a state of existential confusion and worry about his whole relation to God, his being a prophet, the message that he was supposed to take to Nineveh. And so he was in a state of confusion. And in this state, he cries out to God. And the book of Yonah records his whole prayer. And he's able to come through it. But on all of these have to do with a process of transition that are in three days. Okay, now I want to do one more, which is also connected to Akeidat Yitzchak. And that is, we're going to look quickly at two different numbers that appear throughout the story of Avram. And that is 10 and 100. His first test, he's told, Lech Lecha. Go to yourself. Lech Lecha equals 100. The word Lech equals 50 and Lecha equals 50, equals 100. Avram is 100 years old when Yitzchak is born. And after Avram dies and Yitzchak becomes the second patriarch, so one of the verses that hints to the idea that Yitzchak is going to be faithful to Avram's teachings, along with his redigging all of the wells that the Philistines had stopped up. This represents Avram's teachings, and the Philistines tried to stop up the teachings. Avram's no longer there, and his teachings will disappear. But Yitzhak redigs the wells, but it also says that he planted in that year, it was a year of famine, and the yield was 100-fold. So the number 100 follows Avram through, and here in the 10th test, the Akeidah, again it says Lech Lecha. So the number 100 comes again. But we're told that in Kabbalah, that when a number is squared, it represents the full manifestation of that number. So the other number that is very important in the life of Abraham is the number 10. He is given 10 tests. In Parshat Lech Lecha, God promises him to inherit 10 nations, 7 which were in Eretz Canaan, became what we call Eretz Yisrael, and the other 3 are waiting to the Messianic era. So here we see the number 10 a few times, but there's another 10, and that is in the verse of Lech Lecha, the first one, when Avram is told to leave his father's house and his birthplace and actually his land, his birthplace and his father's house. The letter Aleph appears 10 times. 10 times. So those 10 Alephs are a deep allusion to the 10 tests that Avram will have and to the 10 nations that he will inherit. And so I want to connect this. First of all, the first letter of Abraham's name is an Aleph. And we're told that Abraham is the cardinal reincarnation of Adam. Adam begins with an Aleph. So here we see the Aleph is very, very connected to these 10 Alephs. And when we look at an Aleph, we're told that the form of an Aleph is a Yud above and a Yud below, with a vav connecting them. So even in the aleph, you have a yud above and a yud below. So I want to share this idea. That in itself is, it's bringing these numbers together. But I want to go like more primordial. And that is, we know that the Torah begins with a bet, a big bet. And we're told that bet is number 2. It represents that before creation, there's only the oneness of God. And creation implies that there's now an other. There's a bet. There's now duality. There's a bipolar world, a split here, and all of the dualities that make up this world. But it's asked, why does the Torah begin with a bet and not an aleph? Aleph is the first letter. And so we're told in the Zohar, the introduction to the Zohar has this beautiful, fanciful story that all the letters came before God and said, please start the Torah with me. It's like fitting that you start the Torah with me. And each of the letters brings a reason. And they begin from the last letter, Tav. And they bring a reason, and God says, very, very nice reason, and brings a counter reason why it's not fitting to start the Torah with you. Get all the way down to the bet, go through the whole aleph bet. And the bet says, my letter is the first of bracha, of blessing. And with me, we will come to bless you. And here, the Zohar doesn't say this, but this is the idea of 100 blessings a day. Again, the number 100 pops out here. And God says, I like that idea. And that's why when in a quorum, in a minyan, so Baruch Hu, we bless God as a tzibor, as a community. And individually, we say 100 blessings a day. The question is, what happened to the aleph? Why is the aleph not given a chance? So we're told that the aleph is rewarded with being the first letter of the 10 commandments. Again, the number 10. So the first letter of the 10 commandments is Anochi. I am the Lord your God who has taken you out of Egypt. So here I want to propose a different idea, that first of all, there's another reason why we might think that Torah begins with an aleph, but we can understand that if you look at the parchment, so the Torah begins with the word Bereshit, but to the right of it is empty white space. And we're told that the secrets of, it's called the white fire, that the Torah is black fire on white fire. The black fire are the black letters of the Torah, and the white fire is the parchment. And we're told here we spend our whole life studying the letters of the Torah. And we're told only when Mashiach comes will we come to understand the white fire, the space between the letters. And so what comes before the Bet of Bereshit? So the only thing that existed before was the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God. And that's represented by the white parchment, the white light, the white fire. The word for light, or, begins with an aleph. The word for Ein Sof, for infinity, the infinite light, begins with an aleph, Ein Sof. So in a sense, there is an aleph there. There is an aleph there. But here we want to connect it to Avram Avinu. The first letter of Avram is an aleph. So if you would put an aleph before the Bet of Bereshit, it would spell Av, Father. Now, this could refer to our Father in heaven, Avinu Shebashamayim. That's who precedes Bereshit. But here we could also see that the father that precedes Bereshit is Avram. What's the connection with father? Because when Avram gets the name Avraham, extra hey was added to his name. He became Avraham. And God says to him, you are now called Avram because you are Av Hamon Goyim. You will be a father of many nations. And so here we see the importance of Avram as Av. That's what we call him, Avram Avinu, Avram our father. But even deeper, when we look at the second telling of the creation story, it begins, Ela toldot shemayim ba'oretz b'hi baram. These are the generations of heaven and earth in their creation. And in the word bihi baram is a small hey. And we're told that that small hey is the secret of the hey that is given to Avram. So this implies that the creation of the world has to do with Avraham. How is that? So our sages say, don't read it bihi baram, don't read it in their creation, the heavens and the earth in their creation. Read it be'Avraham, that the heavens and the earth were created through Avraham. What is the main trait that we always connect and associate with Avram? Is chesed, is loving kindness. And so we're told, Olam chesed yibaneh, that when God created the world, he created it through chesed. And that's why we're told that the 7 days of creation mirror the 7 lower sfirot. The first of them, which is the first day, is chesed. And Rashi tells us that in essence, everything that would ever be created was created already in the first day, in potential. And all of reality to this day, in a sense, is a manifestation, is an extension, a development of that potential of the first day. So this is very, very connected to the idea of the Big Bang, where we're told that everything in our universe of tens of billions of galaxies, each one with tens of billions of stars, were all contained in that speck, the original initial speck of the Big Bang. But that speck was chesed. So all of creation is through Avraham, bihi baram, through Avram. And that's why we're told that when God wanted to create the world, Yisrael Allah b'machshava techila, the thought of Israel arose first. And so who is Israel? Avram. All of Israel comes from Avraham and Sarah. And so when it says that the idea of Israel arose in God's mind first, it's the idea, the personality, the archetypal essence of Avram that rose in his mind. So one last thing is the Rashi on the first verse of Bereshit says, don't read it in the beginning, Bereshit. Reshit means beginning, means in. We usually translate it in the beginning. He says you can also read it bishvil Bereshit, for the sake of beginning. And then he says, for the sake of the Torah, which is called beginning, the first of his ways, There's a verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs, and that for the sake of Israel, which is called the first of his produce. And so here, again, Israel arose b'machshava techila. And so here we see Avram, we can imagine, this is like a visualization, that there's this invisible aleph before the bet of Bereshit, which, along with many other possible meanings that we explored, but also that it's the aleph of Avram, the aleph and bet of Av Hamon Goyim. And that's why Yeshayahu said that our mission is to be Or Goyim, a light unto the nations. So this is a very, very deep and profound idea. I'll leave it to everyone to meditate on this. I remember in scores and scores and scores of classes that I attended from Rav Ginsburg, some of them went on for 2 or 3 hours. And at the end, he would say, now everyone should go and meditate on what we learned. And back in the day, before computers and everything, so I used to take notes on all of the classes, feverishly taking notes. And I would do that. After a class, for like the whole week afterwards, I would meditate and contemplate what we had learned. So this is a general idea that's how we said in the beginning. Reb Shlomo said, it's not how much you learn, it's how deep is it going? How much is it affecting you, changing you, improving you, being a part of you? So I bless all of us to be able, everything that we learn in Torah, to make it a part of ourselves.